Alright everybody, so I'm going to be going through this 2016 Raptor 90. Right now it's not running, carburetor's dirty, it's been sitting, needs a little TLC other than that. And we're going to get it going and show you how to get to the carburetor, what to look for, how to clean it, and a few other aspects on this machine. To remove the seat, you just simply pull up on this tab and pull the seat back. And that accesses your battery, your airbox. Your airbox cover is here, so you pull these two tabs back, pull the airbox back. That is hopefully how your air filter should look basically. These are a foam air filter, and these should be cleaned with a degreaser or a dish soap and warm water from time to time as they get dirty, and then let it dry and reapply air filter oil all to it and put it back in the airbox. You don't want too much, so when you apply it, kind of wring out any excess before you fully install it. Now, to remove the carburetor on this machine, you're going to want to put the fuel petcock in the off position, which is forward. Down is on, up is reserve, forward is off. You're going to want to remove the fuel line. You're going to want to take off the throttle slide that's here on top of the carburetor. You're going to want to do that before you loosen up the carburetor. That way the carburetor is stiff in here. It makes it easier to turn that. If you can't do it by hand, you should be able to use a pair of pliers and get that off. Remove the fuel line, of course. And you have a Phillips head right here for the intake boot, and two 10mm bolts on the back side of the airbox. You're going to want to take those two bolts off and slide the airbox back, and then on the other side you'll have a Phillips head screw here for a little clamp that goes for the choke cable, and you're going to want to remove that. There's a look at the choke side so that you can see the little Phillips head there on that clamp, and then remove the choke cable. So I've already loosened these up, so there's going to be two 10mm bolts right at the back of the air filter box rather, and you're going to want to take those off just so that when you disconnect the Phillips head clamp where the intake tube goes to the carburetor, you'll be able to slide the airbox slightly up and back so that you have a little more room down by the carburetor. There's that Phillips head. I'm going to crack that loose. You don't even have to take it off completely, just crack it loose. Take the cable, pull it up, and get it off of the arm, and take the cable off. Let's take a pair of pliers if needed. A lot of times you can just grab this by hand and twist it off, but loosen up the top of the throttle needle jet slide here. Back it up all the way and take it off. Make sure it stays together like that with tension. If it falls apart, you're going to have to look at how to put that clip back in. But if you don't have to take this apart, do not. Just leave it like that. I'm going to take the fuel line off. I'm going to take this clamp off here. A pair of 90-degree angle pliers would have been a better thing to grab, but I just grabbed straight needle those. Or that 90-degree, you can grab it a little easier. Should have grabbed them. Might have to because I'm having a little trouble getting this off. I don't care if I ruin the clamp because I have more, so that's not a big deal. But oh. Okay, I was able to remove this clamp here with the pair of pliers. And sometimes you might need to take your fuel line if it's been sitting on there a while, give it a little wiggle, and then you're best off using hose clamp pliers so you don't tear it up. But as long as you can loosen it up, you should be able to just pull it off by hand like that. There we go. Now we're going to loosen up the Phillips head for the clamp on the intake boot. As well as our next step would be to remove the two 8mm bolts that hold the carburetor onto the engine side. Once you get those off, you can separate the intake boot from the carburetor, and you'll be able to remove the carburetor from the machine. The only other place it's going to be connected is right here where the float bowl drain is, but that's not even connected on this one. Right here you're actually going to have your overflow breather hose here too, so you're going to want to pull that off of the carburetor there as well. Now there is one more 10mm bolt right up here on the carburetor, on the airbox, but it's loose enough that you can move this around to remove the carburetor. Alright, so we have the carburetor off the machine on the bench. We have a carburetor rebuild kit from Moose, part number 10031763, and it comes with everything you need: pilot jet, main jet, fuel screw, the gasket, a couple new screws for the float bowl, a little clip, and throttle needle. So everything's in there. If you're not sure about the fuel screw, so this screw that sticks out of the side with the spring on the outside, that is your idle. Okay, you don't want to touch that ideally until the machine is really hot. If you adjust this too high when the machine's cold, when it gets hot, it will probably idle too high. If if it's too low, it might not start as well. So when you put it in, if you have to touch it when it's cold to turn it up, by all means do it, but ideally you don't want to touch that unless the machine is hot. And then right here in the front is your fuel screw. So the way to tell between a fuel screw and an air screw is your fuel screw will always be on the engine side of the carburetor. If it was an air screw, it would probably be on this side. Some of them are set up different. Some have just a spring, some have a spring with an O-ring and a little washer. So make sure you get everything out that is in there, make sure it goes back in the correct orientation, and always count your turns on these. So if you have a cap on it, on your machine here, that might be like a little silver cap or a brass cap, you need to drill that out carefully, or remove it, extract it off there to be able to get to the screw. And this fuel screw, or if it were an air screw, runs the same circuit as your idle jet or your pilot jet. So it helps, that's a circuit that runs idle to 3,000 RPMs, which is 99% of the fuel problems where, your machine will start up, it'll run on choke, you shut the choke off and it dies. That circuit's plugged up. So you do have to remove this. If you don't remove your fuel screw or air screw and you clean the carburetor, it might render useless, because all you'll be doing is pushing stuff in from the pilot jet and pilot circuit right up against that screw, and possibly causing more of an obstruction. Alright, so we got the float bowl off, just 2 screws. Mine was stuck on there pretty good, so I took the back end of my screwdriver handle and I just tapped it and it popped right off. This gasket is super flat and 100% needs to be replaced, and you just see how nasty it is inside here. And if you could smell it, it's gross. It smells horrendous. We're going to remove this pin here. That's for your float bowl. Remove the float and needle. A good check to always do with your floats, especially if you're unsure, if it's old, then usually they're good, but you never know. Just take a little cup of water, take your float, throw it in there while you're working on the rest of the carburetor. to make sure it stays afloat. If there's any cracks in this or it got porous for any reason and it starts to sink in the cup, it's no good and you need a new float. This is your main jet and this is your pilot jet. So we're going to be replacing both of those as we have them both in the kits. If we did not have them in the kits and we were doing a carburetor clean with no replacing of parts, we would still disassemble this and also take off the little emulsion tube that the main jet goes into and make sure all the holes inside here in this tube are all clean. So we're going to remove all that now and get ready to clean the carburetor. So you see I have my 7mm wrench on the emulsion tube itself, and then we're going to hold that and we're going to take a flathead and crack loose that main jet, because you want to take that apart to clean or replace. And then if I can do this with one hand, we're going to, it's kind of a funny way of doing this, but normally I wouldn't do it like this, but I got one hand and it's working. So we would take off the emulsion tube. See, look at all that nastiness in the bottom. Look at that. That's all stale fuel stuck to that. That will cause some problems. You want to make sure that all these holes that are in this emulsion tube are cleaned through. It's got all those little tiny holes. If those aren't cleaned through, this thing is not going to take throttle when you open the throttle. I would advise that if you have any carburetor dip, some type of solution to soak this in, soak it in, and I'm going to do that. Same thing as well. You're going to want to clean this out, of course. I still have to take the fuel screw out, but you want to clean through this really well, as best as possible, with carburetor cleaner and compressed air. I'm going to take a little brush, probably a brass bristle brush, and just clean all that stuff inside real good as well, just to get everything out of there. Now also, before you move your fuel screw or an air screw, if your carburetor happens to have an air screw, you want to turn it in clockwise and count every half a turn and see where that's at. Now typically with a fuel screw, it's anywhere between 2 and 3 turns out. So you would drive the screw all in until it's lightly seated. You don't want to tighten it too much, just lightly seat it, and then you're going to back it out 2, 2.5, 3 turns. You could probably get a spec from it, but again, that's also kind of guideline. So if something says 2.5 turns out, that's a good way to start. Then when you have it on the machine and you have it running, you may want to play with it in tiny increments. You might find that at 2 3/4 out it's better. You might find at 3 it's better, or 2 1/4 out is better. Whatever it happens to be. Now if it's an air screw and it's on the intake side, typically those are about 3/4 of a turn out to 1 turn out. Again, 3/4 is where I would probably always start everything. Something might be happier at a half, something might be happier at 1 1/4 turns out. But an air screw always has less turns out than a fuel screw. And that's what your fuel screw will look like on this machine. This one is just a screw and a spring. But easy way to tell if you're not sure and you look down there, and you're like, geez, I don't know if there's a washer and an O-ring or not. And you could always check with the diagram or manual. But also, if it just simply looks like it does not have enough room for a little washer and O-ring, it probably doesn't have one. But if it did and it was down in there still, I take a paper clip and I straighten it out, and then I bend the very end of it just a tiny bit, and I stick it down in that hole and I slowly pick it out. So that's everything. That's the carburetor off the machine. That's the carburetor completely disassembled to be cleaned. I'm going to soak the bowl. I'm going to soak the emulsion tube. I'm going to probably soak the jets anyhow, although I'm going to use the new ones from the kit. But I'll soak them and clean them, and then I'll put them in a container for spare parts. But and then I'm going to scrub this out as best as I can. Always be careful with this O-ring or get a replacement for it. This one seems fine here, but that is where it seals to the engine, so you don't want any type of leak there as well. So it's always good to replace it. This one I could feel that it's raised up enough that it's still going to make a very good seal. So just started it up, put the carburetor on, put put in the jet kit, made sure everything was as clean as possible, put it back together. It had a dead battery, so I have it on the battery charger, and it only took a couple minutes to charge. Started right up. Ran really rough, and what I did was I adjusted the idle kind of on the high side, and it's a little high right now, but I adjusted it on the high side. It smoothed out a lot when I turned the fuel screw in. So the fuel screw is at about 3/4 of a turn out right now. Still idling a little high. But what you want to do is make adjustments, very small adjustments, and in between each adjustment, give it a couple of hits of the throttle, and it should be pretty smooth. And it shouldn't have any type of idle hang. And these are automatic. You just put them in gear and you go. So the idles on these are typically high anyhow. I'm not 100% on the idle setting on this, but I will try to put that spec in the video. And of course, this does not have any type of gauge to tell you idle. So I kind of go by ear on where it should be set, and I slowly adjust this the more hot it gets to try to get it to a happy tone of idle, or you can use an RPM gauge that's a tachometer that's connects to a multimeter and go around the spark plug lead, and you can get your RPM that way. I think we're just about there. A teeny tiny bit of a hang there still. It could possibly be because the machine is still warming up a little. But ideally what I did was I played with once I got it to idle pretty good, I played with the fuel screw, and I turned it in very slowly until it got to a real high idle, and then that's when I started to adjust my idle setting screw. You see it kind of took a little bit to come down there. So I'm going to turn the idle down just a tad bit more. So it came down quickly and smooth that time. Of a hang there. If you have like a crazy big hang, check it for any air leaks. Maybe you're missing the O-ring that's supposed to go in here. Maybe it's not sealing good. Who knows? It could be anything. Could be the top's not tight or something. A couple of situations. Of course, you want the machine to be hot, okay, when you adjust the idle, really. I'm doing it little by little as it's warming up. But when it's at full operating temperature and it's hot, that's when you really want to set that idle. I'm only going in little tiny turns. That's nice there. Gave it a little bit more throttle that time, so it just took a little bit more, but I think that's about where we want to be. Sounds good to me by my ear. Turn it down just a little tiny bit. Too low for my liking. Maybe that's where it likes speed. You don't want to turn it too low, because then when it's real cold, it might not idle well. Of course, you'll have to use a choke to warm it up, but I think that's good right there. We're going to blast it around the yard a little bit and burn through some of that fuel that's in there. I did put some fresh fuel in the tank, and it has stabilizer in it as well, but I'm going to run it around a little bit, get it to take some throttle, and should be good. It's idling, it starts, it's running. Hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope to catch you on the next one. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, comments, put them below. Make sure you smack that subscribe.